So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's fireside chat. We're super excited to be here. Today's fireside chat is called Navigating the Cloud, Expert Insights on Emerging Cloud Threats and Complexities. My name is Jordan with the team here at Cado Security. So I'll be kind of moderating a little bit at the beginning and at the end, but James will be our main moderator today. I'm really excited to welcome our presenters to you today. So we have James Campbell, who is Cado's CEO and co-founder, and Robert Wallace, Senior Director at Mandiant. So thank you both for joining us today. But before I pass it over to you guys to do some brief introductions and to kick us off, I wanted to note a few things at the front of today's webinar. So first, for all attendees, we are going to leave time for an open Q&A at the end of today's session. So you can feel free to post questions inside the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we'll address as much of those as we can at the end of today's session. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand later as well. Okay, I think that's it from my side to kick things off. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to James and Robert. So why don't you guys just do some brief introductions, and then James, you can kind of kick off the conversation.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, Robert, you are the guest, so I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll go after you. Not a problem.
All right, sure. So, hey everyone, happy to be here. Robert Wallace, Senior Director at Mandiant. I'm an incident responder consultant. Been doing digital forensics for a long time now. I'm hesitant to quote the number because we've got
I like how you hesitated when you were trying to figure out how long it's been.
Our age, right, James? We've been at this. We'll just say north of 15 years, and we'll just cut it right there because we're splitting hairs at that point. We've been doing this a long time. I've been at Mandiant for 9 years, and prior to joining Mandiant, I used to work at PwC, doing computer forensics and response, which is interestingly, that's how James and I first met, working cases together at PwC, 10 years ago? It's been a minute.
I'd say it's been close to 10 years, which is pretty scary. But yeah, I think you're about right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So James and I go way back. We've been in the trenches for a long time now. So I'm happy to be here and, working with Cado. We're partners now, right? It's a fascinating partnership from our perspective because James, like you've been doing this work, for the majority of your career, and now you're building tools for investigators to leverage. From my perspective, there are a lot of tools that are born out of actual incident response and forensics, and so what you're building just caters to a very specific
need. Born out of the need.
Absolutely. So I have to ask you, going back. Back in the day, did you ever envision this of yourself? Like when we were working cases together and always like fighting with our tools and so frustrated with them. And always like imagining like, oh, it'd be so much better if someone did this. And I feel like that's kind of like your origin story.
Oh yeah, to be honest, my origin story is like, so for those on the line, and thank you for joining. So my background, as Robert said, is cyber incident response as well. Starting out with the Australian Signals Directorate, or better known as the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, now doing incident response for national government. But now I live in London, where I was working as a consultant as well in doing incident response for PwC across Europe, and that's how Robert and myself met. And I guess the one thing, and I think we'll touch base on some of it today, talking about some of the threats and how we're dealing with it now versus how we were dealing with it then. A nice segue to that is, a lot of what we're doing at Cado just came off the back of my own daily grind, trying to help customers deal with, incidents. And I think one of the things that really fascinated me about our space is like, even today, right? Like some of the tooling we use in incident response, has the exact same interface I had when I was a graduate in 2007. It's the same kind of coursework, the same everything, and largely hasn't changed. And so, I think today would be great. I think for the audience here to hear from yourself, Robert, about like what's changed in our environment, how attackers have changed, And I think more importantly, like why it's so important that the space of incident response and forensics kind of starts to, modernize, I guess, in a way, which is going to keep up with the challenge, because at the pace we're going right now, it is a struggle, right? So it is a struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a nice segue there, sort of teeing up into what we're seeing and how the space is evolving. So I have to put a plug out there. Today, we've released the Mandiant M Trends 2024 report. We put that out
Awesome.
annually, and it tracks, all the trends that we're seeing over the past year. A lot of stats, a lot of metrics, and some of the stories that go with that. But there's a section in there just dedicated to what we're seeing in the cloud. I think the report just came out, so I'm probably going to butcher the stats, but I was studying up on it last week. I think in our customer base, 90% of our customers that we're doing incident response for leverage the cloud in some capacity, right? So, from our perspective, like the cloud's ubiquitous, like pretty much
Yeah.
everyone's using it. And that also is the same for attackers, right? That's where the data is. There's also a lot of keys that are stored in the cloud. And that's a big trend within the MTrends report is targeting the cloud. It's not just for like stealing data from publicly exposed S3 buckets. We're seeing a lot of like supply chain attacks where it's like, let's see how many like AWS IAM keys I can steal and then pivot into all those customers' environments. And you just see just hopping in and out of everyone's clouds. And like that type of activity, like it's been around, right? We saw it in data centers back in the day, right? Now we just
Yeah,
see it in
absolutely.
a form, and we still see the data centers like and on-prem and all those other sort of components of an investigation playing a part in it, right? The cloud's just one other source of evidence. It's not to say that all the threats are just in the cloud, right? We see a lot of what we call vertical movement, right? You may be
Yeah.
familiar with like the traditional lateral movement of attackers moving in and around a data center, internal reconnaissance. Now we'll see them, socially engineer a user, get onto an endpoint, typically a developer, and then move vertical into the cloud once they've stolen
Do
the
you
key.
find, so this is exactly why we have you on here, Robert, and getting it from the horse's mouth, so to say. I think there's no better place than Mandiant to talk about the experience of what's genuinely happening every day across multiple enterprises. And I guess do you like when you come across these kind of incidents that are involving some element of cloud, and no doubt involves like on-prem, a bit of SaaS, a bit of kind of
Yeah.
SaaS platforms like Office 365 or whatever it might be, and also potentially cloud environments who kind of got multi kind of premise style situations that you have to investigate as part of kind of one thing. But do you find like most customers, are kind of prepared, particularly when it involves cloud, or are they even aware that like, around kind of, what the threats are and how it's different to treating, how they deal with on-premise side of things? Or do you think
So
there's a lot more education to be happening there?
there's a lot more education to be had, but also a biased point of view, right? A lot of organizations we're working with, they weren't previously thinking about all this, which is, largely why they've engaged reactive consulting services to help them respond. So yeah, definitely seeing like folks sort of just being unaware of like, oh, here's how attackers are bypassing multi-factor authentication to take your keys and then pivot into the cloud environment. And for a lot of people, it once they look at it, like, oh, that was relatively trivial to pull off. How do we secure that going forward? And that's a different part of the equation,
Hmm.
beyond the investigation piece of it, but it also is an opportunity to help folks harden their environments and just like also make sure you got the logs, right? I mean, how many times you
Yeah.
go into a case, it's, oh man, there's no evidence, right?
Well, I guess on that point as well, I think some of the things we've seen, I'm sure it resonates with you as well, and interested if it does, is I think people's perception around the kind of shared responsibility model. So it's kind of, we're using cloud, it's the cloud provider's responsibility for security, which isn't usually the case actually, and as like a shared responsibility model there, which I think a lot of people struggle with getting their heads around. Is that, do you feel like people taking on board cloud services and the likes, that maybe they're thinking, oh, actually some of that security should be baked in, or how does that come across on your side?
Yeah, not necessarily the sort of that shared responsibility. I know there's been a lot of like major cases in the news about, right, that Microsoft's been dealing with.
Yeah.
Google sort of has this shared fate philosophy in terms of how they approach it, but still, organizations like need to be getting logs, right? They need to have visibility. They need to manage their secrets, right, and manage those keys properly. Um, I would also say where we see a lot of it, especially like in the cloud space. We recently worked a Web3 case together, right? And if you look
Mm.
at a lot of like Web3 organizations, they obviously very security conscious, right? Because of what the sort of the area they're working in, but also they build really fast, right? They go fast, and they just forget to like, hey, we need to be logging this. We'll call it Web2 stuff, right? Some of their like internal infrastructure stuff,
Mm.
not just sort of on chain. And so, I mean, we just see like really smart people who just weren't even aware of all these configuration settings and how to harden environments and how to also like you need to monitor those components and those pieces of it.
That's something I'd love to dive down into a little bit, is that kind of complexity and kind of I guess that problem space. I guess kind of wrapping up your kind of, opening statements there, which was really useful. Thank you. Like, kind of clean cut, right? It sounds like you guys are dealing with quite regularly attackers kind of leveraging cloud, right?
Absolutely.
That's pretty straightforward. And it's quite interesting. Like we do come across kind of customers where um, they don't necessarily feel like that's where, a lot of the threat is. But certainly it seems, even from our point of view and your own, that it is just a daily occurrence, given that data is shifting to the cloud. A lot of operational activities for organizations rely on cloud as well. And so why wouldn't attackers be there too? My kind of final thought on that, and then I'd love to kind of touch on why it's why is this a little bit complicated, I guess, and kind of what complexities does kind of dealing with cloud bring to the table. But why do you think it is that a lot of people don't think there's a lot of stuff happening in cloud? So I would say there's a bit of an understatement, from a public perspective at least, of that not a lot is happening in cloud, but in fact, someone like yourself who's at the coalface of it every day, there is a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are just really focused on building, and cloud enables you to build really fast,
Mm.
scale really quickly,
Oh yeah.
right? I'm sure like even as a small business owner, right? Like you guys are building rapidly, you're constantly releasing stuff, right? And I think for really lean organizations, um, they maybe sometimes overlook that need for like monitoring and investigation capabilities, right? I think
Yeah.
they're just moving so fast, um, and they have the right mindset that they're just overlooking some of these, like, I'm going to say maybe they're perceived as historical hacking problem, but it's not. It's the same threat actors. It's every threat actor, right? From espionage to criminal to scammers, you name it. Everyone is in the cloud, from customers and clients to threat actors.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I quite often have the conversation where, an organization is doing a bit of a lift and shift of a lot of their data center capabilities into cloud, whether it be, any one of the major vendors. And I often have the conversation of like, oh, cool, okay, that's quite a risky period, right? You're moving things which are traditionally on-prem, which have had a firewall and a kind of a gateway in the way, straight into cloud. Have you guys kind of profiled that risk? Have you got a way of detecting new threats, or even responding to them as well? Like if you found something, as part of that transition, what do you do next? And they're like, oh yeah, we're definitely on our roadmap, on our program, but we're going to wait until the data's into the cloud and the systems are in the cloud, and then we're going to look at our security program, which seems a little bit backwards to me.
It does, right? And you're right. That's like a really vulnerable point in time when you're doing that shift. And oftentimes what we see is like post shift, people keep that data center running for a little while, just, it makes them feel secure because they still
Yeah.
have all that. Those data centers, that legacy stuff actually gets hacked a ton, and then they
Oh
just
yeah.
pivot right into the cloud. So once you do that lift and shift, really make a concerted effort to sunset all of that old legacy infrastructure, because that stuff's just hanging out there as an avenue right into your cloud.
Yeah. No. Nice. And I guess from your perspective, why do you like what sort of complexities, and happy to I'll give us some examples myself, but I'd love to hear from you first. Why do you think people are, finding dealing with cloud challenging? It's almost as if like they know they have to do this, but it's quite a task. It's quite complex. What sort of kind of challenges, like what's different between on-prem and cloud in that respect?
I think one of the things that's really different is like some of like containers and ephemeral architecture, things that aren't
Yeah.
persistent per se,
Oh yeah.
right? How do you grab evidence from those things? Um, how do you know if keys were taken from, like, I think the ephemeral nature of it is one of them, right? Um, and then
Things are spinning up
understanding,
and down all the time. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, right? There's that component of it. And then I think the other one is just really like, taking the time to read the manuals, if you will, to figure out how to tune your logging just right.
Yeah.
There's plenty of cases we've gone into where like, oh yeah, we have logging, CloudTrail logs, for example, right?
Yeah.
But like they don't have like object level auditing it's just like, oh, you didn't turn this feature on. We know the attacker is here, but we can't see what they're doing because it's not logged. And let's go turn that feature on, right? So I think those are the two main ones, right? The ephemeral nature of it,
Yeah.
and just the log. I think cloud actually makes things a lot easier, and I think this is what I love about Cado. Like, instead of it being a challenge, you sort of flipped it on its head. It's like, no, we'll use the cloud in order
Exactly.
to investigate the cloud and speed this whole thing up.
Yeah, and I think we'll touch on that in a second with like, I think one of the really important things around cloud is using its strength to also deal with a little bit of that weakness there, and that's through that automation kind of component. But I guess kind of resonating on the ephemeral infrastructure point of view, right? Like I've talked to a few customers out there where they're like, "Hey, we've got detections in our Kubernetes environment in, say, AWS, just to pick one. It could be Azure or Google, of course, in Kubernetes as well. And they're like, we've got roughly a 15-minute life cycle on our containers that serve our external customers. We get a detection in there, like the data's gone by the time we get anywhere near, trying to work out what's going on. You could be at lunch, get a detection, data's gone. Like that's a scary position to be in. Like when, we've on premise, right? If it was a server, you had a detection, the server's not really going anywhere. You can kind of go and grab it, right? But with cloud, you got auto scaling groups, you got ephemeral infrastructure, you even got serverless like Lambda and the likes of that, so it all functions. And there isn't even a server or something to query in that sort of case. So, you know, a lot of people are just like, oh, okay, cool. Now I have 100 detections this month, which I had no way of triaging or saying I did the right things. And so that's a hugely different challenge from that perspective.
Huge, right? Like, for me, I'm like, man, I wish all my customers had Cado deployed, so when we show up, we can just hop into Cado and like evidence is being preserved. There we go. Solve the big
That's
problem
that's
for
the
it.
idea. Yeah, all through automation. To give you an idea, we have some honeypotting infrastructure, of course, to kind of keep an eye on some of the threats. And last time I was at RSA conference, I was, just actually demonstrating live compromises of the honeypot infrastructure, and it was a container running in a cloud service provider, or is it which one? But a cloud service provider, and we only had one vulnerable service, just one vulnerable service. We didn't run 100 of them, just one at a time, and it would get popped on average about every 15 to 20 minutes. Which is crazy, right? Like, can you imagine having, just having an exposed service of some variety available, just even for half an hour? The chances of it being compromised is relatively high. What's even worse is that most people don't have the ability to actually see that they were compromised in the first place, which is a little scary, which is where we've seen some issues unravel bigger issues. So, as an example, developers and the likes of that, obviously can, have a container running. Seems like not a big deal. It only lasts 15 minutes, right? So, security maybe not top priority. But, let's say we store the keys to access another system or to spin up another cloud resource, or even keys to or credentials to a database that might be available elsewhere. And they can suck that down and then use that to go somewhere else. And in fact, we did a SANS presentation once where we showed the example of a hacker actually breaking out of a container onto a node in Kubernetes and then actually creating their own console account for that cloud provider. So, which again, there's a different level there, isn't it? Because you're going runtime and then now you're on a control plane. So you're on the console and nothing you're running from an agent or anything like that from a runtime perspective is going to spot that activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, right? But, I'd say taking in a holistic picture, right, of like a security program, right, and bringing all those things together, whether it be through SIEM or, whatever folks are into, having the ability to respond to it is the next step, right? Largely people are kind of blind to it. And then there's no way to respond to it. Now it's like, hey, you need that visibility, right? I can't protect what I can't see. And then you just need the ability to respond when you do see something to triage those alerts.
Absolutely. And I guess that probably brings us a nice little segue. So not necessarily all doom and gloom. And I guess, there's a lot going on. So we've established that plenty of stuff that people aren't aware of as well. I can 100% say that from our perspective too. And then the cloud brings, kind of a new level of complexity through kind of resources just kind of spinning up, spinning down. Also complexity in the sense of, it's so easy to, leverage the technologies and to, spin things up and down. You won't have an agent or logging or anything like that. So a bit of like shadow IT, so to say, just on steroids from that perspective. So kind of moving on to kind of some of the strategies or, how does kind of automation kind of play a role here with cloud, and how do we, and I guess you've had some experience with Cado, and I don't want to make this about Cado necessarily, Robert, but like what do you think, what are some things that people could be thinking about or should be thinking about when it comes to protecting themselves in cloud? And I think logging was one of the first ones you kind of hit the nail ahead on at the earlier part.
Yeah, logging's a big one. Hardening the environment. I know that's a generic term, but there's a lot of guides out there, especially from the three big cloud providers, right? Like you can find all this documentation and turn that on. That part of it's key. I think it's a component of an overall security program in general, right? It's hard to say like, oh, you should only focus on cloud or only on endpoint. Like you should focus on security and find the right balance around risk and things of that nature. And then like, I know this isn't about Cado per se, but I would say like, I mean, for like Mandiant retainer customers that have our retainers, I would encourage them like, hey, you should consider having something like a Cado in your environment. For folks who are operating the cloud, because in the event that you have a retainer, right? Like you're ready to respond in an event, you're going to have your evidence too. It's just going to make for a much faster response time. The average dwell time is down to like 10 days now for attacks, right?
Wow.
So
yeah,
I think that also can correspond to like incident response times are down as well, right? We have to go faster, means we got to work more cases. And we got to do them in a shorter amount of time. And so having these types of capabilities, it reduces the impact to an organization when something bad does happen.
Absolutely. I guess so 100% I would, recommend people do embrace cloud. Like cloud is an amazing technology that it allows your organization to move quickly as well. But obviously that comes with new risk. You can't just, usually it used to take a while to provision a server and then, make sure you punch a hole through the firewall and all that sort of thing. But those things don't exist anymore. It's a very different playing field.
No, because we got hacked all the time, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
it's just because we're moving to cloud doesn't mean that it's like, the security just shift. That's really it, right? The bad guys don't go away.
The bad guys don't go away. Yeah, it's just shifted exactly. So, and I think one of the things, obviously, is something that Cado is designed to do out of the box is to kind of help solve a lot of these challenges. But, focusing on the core kind of thing, beyond Cado is, well, how do you deal with things like spinning up and down resources? How do you deal with things disappearing? And also like random assets all over the place. Like, let's be honest, I think a lot of cloud networks tend to have a Wild West component to them. And so how do you deal with all that? And also keep your sanity too. Because you also, as an incident responder, like, okay, yes, you've got to have high level knowledge of all the different cloud technologies, but there are whole job roles just for like a Kubernetes expert, right? That's a day job for someone, and you can't know the ins and outs of all the different flavors of containerized and Docker systems, etc. You can't know all the flavors or the various different cloud technologies, and so good to have the high level knowledge, of course, and understand the threat and risk, and so you can advise customers on what's next. But really, I think what I found has resonated the most is like, and this is playing to cloud strength, is like really automation. So like automating a lot of those components and getting that data to yourself or the team, or to especially Robert off the back of a Mandiant retainer. Having that data ready to roll, to dive into as and when you need to. And automation plays a key role there for you to be able to adopt in a cloud in a way you should, right? You shouldn't have cloud just be an expensive data center that's going to get very expensive very quickly, but you should be using auto scaling groups. You should be using thermal infrastructure. This is also how you save loads of money with the cloud as well, if you're using it right. But that brings that challenge. And so automation is like, okay, cool. I now have that detection in that container. I better go and automate that data capture from that container in that moment in time, and have all that forensic information ready to roll. Even though that container spins down, you've still got that kind of forensic data, and that's super important, and making sure that's kind of all automated. And I guess, Robert, to your point, like really it's about being prepared too. So, making sure you have not only, retained providers such as yourselves, but also talk to them about, what sort of logging should we enable if you're not sure, like what's available, like how can we get ahead of that? How do we turn that on? And then how do we actually get this automation in place so when something does fire, I don't need to worry about how the hell do I connect? How do I connect with a container running in Kubernetes and grab all the forensic data before it spins down? So, you shouldn't be stressing about that, because cloud can actually kind of solve its own problem there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you, yeah, we were cobbling together scripts all these years, right? And we still do, right? Like, I got a script for this and a script for that. But you took all that and you're like, because I'd be like, oh, I need a GCP one and I need an AWS, and right, it gets confusing. And you have experts around the world, and each one, like you said, has its own particular job function, right? And you just put them all together, and it's like, hey, we got it all right here, and it's like, oh,
Oh,
this is great. We got multi-cloud hybrid all covered now.
And as an incident responder, right? Like, you guys need to do what you do best, and that is, working out what the bad guys are doing and doing that quickly on behalf of the customer. Kind of stemming the risk and the flow there. And I think the last thing you want to do is be playing around with, hacky scripts and all sorts while an attacker is running around. Like, I did a job once where we had it was an Iranian APT group. We had to go investigate about 80 odd systems, right? And this was before Cado. This is my consulting role, and it took us nearly a month to go collect those systems, like a month to go and collect 80 systems, and that's a crazy long time, just to go collect the data. But with cloud, like, we can do that within an hour now. So, which is,
oh yeah, I love it. And also no
crazy.
deployment either, right? Think of like the pain in deploying technology during investigation, yep. Right? Pushing out agents if you don't have them.
Not that you have experience with that, Robert.
Yeah. It can be painful for everyone involved.
Pushing tech out in a crisis situation is never
how long does it take to deploy Cado, right? Like, you just send
minutes, because it's all API, so no agents or anything like that, which is pretty cool. And I know you guys like it for that particularly. So because you deal with quite a lot of XDR as well, deployments, and doing that in a live fire situation is, I'm sure, very tricky for you guys.
Yeah, but now we can show up, and clients a lot of times have EDR technologies in place, which is great. Now we can operate on top of what they have deployed, and bring in other tools where necessary, right? So it's like we can get endpoint coverage, we can get cloud coverage, and all the other different places where we need to get visibility. It's great, and this is just for us, Cado is an important tool in the tool belt.
Yeah. No, awesome. Now we're happy you guys are involved. And I guess one last final thought, and then we'll go to questions. I think Jordan came online just a moment ago to give us the hurry along, but we could talk all day long, I think. But I'd be silly not to ask this question of you, Robert. And I know we talked a lot about automation, but how do you think kind of AI and LLMs are playing a role here? In our space right now, like, does it have a home in incident response? Do you think it's a beneficial thing or a bit overhyped?
A little both. It is beneficial
Yep.
though overall. Yeah. I think it's going to be key in automating a lot of the work within the SOC. For if you look
Yep.
at like just security operations in general, hugely beneficial there. I still look at it as an assistant. However, like we're in the early stages of this, right? And I think it's going to evolve from assistant to analyst. We've been doing some really interesting research on our side, James, and I was reading some internal stuff the other day about how the virus tool team has been able to use Gemini 1.5 and as a malware analyst, like they've trained it, and they can submit like
Wow.
a 1 meg up to a 1 meg binary, and within like seconds get like a malware analyst triage report in the same way you would get from your malware analyst that you work with on a case, right? So it's evolving, it's coming along. That's just one use
Like
case.
leveling up your sandbox to the max.
Absolutely. I think there's so much more coming, but the way they did it was they basically fed it the disassembled code or decompiled code. Sorry, I think it can also handle disassembled. So right, like someone went through the step to decompile it and then
Yeah.
plop it in there and let it stay. But again, we're just at the beginning. So I want to see it go from assistant to analyst. I don't see it replacing jobs. I see it augmenting sort of what we're
Yeah,
doing.
augmenting, yeah, getting good information fast. Yeah. You
Absolutely.
still got to get the right information into it, right? Otherwise you get a crap output at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And kind of, I think we're kind of getting close to time here where we can take some questions. So if people have some questions, Jordan, how do they do that, please?
Yeah, they can post those at the bottom. So we've received some questions, but feel free if you haven't. We probably won't get to all of them today, but we can definitely follow up if we don't get to them today. I think we should take a few and then close out in a few minutes if that makes sense for you guys. Cool. Okay, so I have two questions that are kind of similar, so I'm going to kind of combine them and I'll throw it out there to either of you to answer. And I think it's very timely with the M-Trends report coming out because it's around threat trends. So someone asked around like what are the biggest cloud threat trends that you see moving forward? And then also another similar question about a popular objective in the cloud being crypto mining. And kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that, like if you see this kind of being an ongoing trend or if you can elaborate more on any like diversification here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say biggest threat, it's really around credentials, right? Is um, attackers access the infrastructure. There's all types of ways to get in, but basically that identity and access management layer is kind of like the firewall for the cloud nowadays. Being able to manage who has access to what. I think modern security now is really around hardening those ACLs. And then as it relates to the threat of crypto mining, also a huge problem, right? One way organizations detect it is through expensive bills. I don't like that as a technical solution to detecting evil in my environment, but that is one way organizations are picking up on it. It's like, why do we have 1,200 extra EC2 instances deployed? Things like that. It's definitely a big trend, but I think the detection part of it goes back to your standard sort of detection and response capabilities. The crypto mining thing, that is a real threat, and we see it everywhere. I know, James, you run into it all the time as well. It really it's like a nuisance and a resource drain, but it also leverages a lot of the same sort of TTPs that you would see in other types of attacks. So all that to say is like building out robust detection and response capabilities, understanding your sort of your threat profile, who's coming after you. I think that helps inform your risk-based decisions on where to harden, how to harden, and where to monitor.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think one of the trends we saw around, well, one of the interesting things, we track a couple of kind of groups which do a lot of crypto, mining, and particularly in things like containers, obviously. But there's definitely been a pivot there where, and to be honest, most people don't notice this because they don't have the ability to, really, or haven't got that kind of pre-deployed ability to investigate. But like they're not only just running kind of crypto mining, but they're also like stealing, credentials, as you say, so credential theft, and you leveraging that for other purposes. In some cases, we've seen them use those credentials to leverage attacks on other infrastructure using your own cloud network. We definitely see loads of that happening. And then, and really a lot of those credentials can gain access to some pretty sensitive information. So, I won't go through some of the examples just in case it embarrasses anybody particularly, but like, and I think what's quite interesting is that what they get, you get like this crypto mining detection, but you don't get anything around like what else did they do on that system, like what else did they grab, what was the risk, and so people were like, oh, okay, crypto mining, okay, not a big deal, I'm going to close this ticket, and then next thing you know, you find out a month later that something horrible actually happened. So yeah, it's quite an interesting situation, and it's so we track one group actually, they even post online how many cloud systems they've compromised at any one moment. It's like 20,000 or something. Like, it has been a long time since I checked, but like that's how brazen it is. But yeah, they're so successful. And I would say that's on the I won't shout it out too loud, but on the lower end of the sophistication scale. So more opportunistic kind of stuff. So imagine all the stuff that's happening when it comes to the targeted side, which is, I'm sure, what you're dealing with more and more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you,
Thanks,
James.
Jordan.
Robert.
Any other questions, Jordan?
Let's take one more question and then we'll close out. And any unanswered questions we'll follow up after the webinar. I like this question because you guys talked a little bit about how a lot of like this organization is definitely not alone. So this is the question. Our organization has just migrated a lot of resources to the cloud, and they're just starting to ramp up essentially on the security side of things. And they're asking if you guys have any suggestions on like what's a good first step.
On the security cloud migration.
Yes.
I'd say first step, for whichever cloud provider you're utilizing, read through the documentation on the logging capabilities and turn on each one of those relevant features, and then make sure you're actually like analyzing these logs and monitoring there. So get your logging right. And then second, I would say check out some of the hardening guides. Mandiant publishes these on a regular basis. If you scour our website and our blog, you'll find. I know that isn't a great answer, but there's definitely like hardening guides out there that I think people might find useful in order as they sort of start their journey. You're not going to be perfect day one, but if you have visibility, you have logs, you are ahead of most organizations.
Thank you,
That's
Robert.
great. I think from my perspective, to just add to that, is really understanding what's in your cloud. It's kind of, trying to understand like what sort of data is in there, how it relates to your day-to-day business operations, and it will help you kind of profile that risk a little bit better. Also, make sure you can access stuff when it comes time to respond or investigate. Quite often people will be like, oh man, we've got this like really crazy detection on this system. We need to look at it now. And, it's a system in another region or that they don't really know about, that they don't even know who the owner of the system is. And it takes them a while to find out, and it takes them a while to get access to that information. All the meanwhile, they're kind of, everything's on fire and they're freaking out. So, if you prepare well, cloud can be a really good strength there in, kind of making sure you get quick access to information and data as and when you need it. I think it's a game changing from that perspective. So really good.
And be militant with those keys, right? Whether it be IAM access keys, SSH keys, things in that net. Hackers love stealing keys, and I've been surprised because in a lot of our investigations, there's just keys everywhere, just all over the place. It's just like, what? Which one got right? They all got stolen, but in any event, be aware of those keys and how it's accessed. Be sure you're tracking those. We'll see some that it's like, oh, this key's like 4 years old, no one's used it, but somehow the attacker had it and they just logged into our environment. And you're just like, oh, great.
It's that simplicity, creating. It's great. You can create a key and create instant access to systems to do your job, but it also creates a minefield from a risk perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much, James, for your time and for sharing your knowledge today. I really enjoyed listening in on the conversation, so thank you so much. I hope everyone who joined as well enjoyed and found today's content valuable. We will follow up with any questions that went unanswered. Thank you so much for submitting those. And with that, we'll close out today and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Bye,
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, John.
Bye.
Yes.